Dream of a pastor to have a kid know the end of your sermon. Yes. I'll tell you what, Pam brought me a wonderful surprise this morning. I don't know how many of you saw this in the paper, but you know for the last 6 weeks we've been going through the I ams of Scripture where Jesus made a proclamation, I am. Pam brought this to me, and it was a wonderful surprise. Now, some people won't worship in church today. They're going to go down to the Orpheum. Some people aren't going to worship in church. They're going to go down to the Sioux City Convention Center. But none of them got a full-page ad they didn't pay for that talked about the sermon title. So there. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. Wiping a damp cloth. Wiping a damp cloth across her brother's forehead, she thought. The fever must be high. He was hot to the touch, and his clothes were drenched with sweat, clinging to his skin. She looked at his drawn face, drained of all color. He had lost so much weight so fast. For what must have been the 1,000th time, her thoughts turned to Jesus. And she asked, where is he? Will he make it in time? She pictured her brother just a week ago sitting at the dinner table. She had told a joke. She didn't tell many. He sprayed the wine that he was drinking all over the place when she hit the punchline. He looked at the mess that he made. Spatters of red wine dotted his sister's face. He started laughing even harder. They were all laughing until their stomachs ached from the strain. She remembered the dancing of Lazarus, the dancing in Lazarus' deep brown eyes. How many times had she seen that familiar twinkle? That was one of the little things she loved about her brother. But the light was gone from his eyes, and she sighed as she tried to get Lazarus to sip some more water. Under her breath, she said, I hope he'll hurry. Martha watched the life drain from her brother. The doctors had been in and did what little they could. The rabbi from the synagogue stopped and offered prayer, yet her brother continued to decline. It had been going on for days. She had seen this before in others, and it seldom ended well. I wonder how far away he is, she thought. As she lay in her bed listening to her brother's soft moans nearby, she thought of the life her brother still should have in front of him. Will I see him get married? Will I ever hear the laughter of nieces and nephews? Will I ever see him grow old and a respected elder, passing his wisdom to younger generations? And then she wondered again, didn't he get the message about Lazarus? Is he on his way? In the morning, her brother was worse, periodically going into shapes and then suddenly became very still. Then he gave a sudden sharp cry and gasped and was. Martha yelled, no, Lazarus, wake up! No, hang on, he'll be here soon. Mary began to cry. Martha looked up in shock at her sister and then again at Lazarus. The moment seemed frozen in time, and then reality swept over her. She slumped and buried her head in her brother's chest and began to sob. 4 days later, before Jesus showed up. The funeral was over, body had been buried. Martha went out to meet him. She put on a brave face. The accusation tumbled out before she could stop herself. If you had only been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus said, your brother will rise again. I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Jesus said, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. He paused and looked into her eyes that had been bloodshot from crying. And then he gently asked, do you believe this? The question for us on Easter Sunday is simply this. Do you believe this? For Mary and Martha, that was the question that Jesus had posed to them. For Peter and John and Mary Magdalene at the tomb on that first Easter morn, the question was the same. Do you believe this? That is the question for me and for you today. Do you believe this? Martha's comment is one that please do not ever get yourself to the point where you are accusing someone in Scripture for saying or doing something you would never do. The minute you say, I would never, is the moment that you will start down that same road. I will never break down in front of my congregation, right? And then I have a little child come bring me a gift. She made a statement, Jesus, if you would have been here, he would not have died. 4 days after Lazarus had died, something happened. Lazarus was raised from the dead. It was something that Martha and Mary and Lazarus' friends and all the mourners that had gathered around never, ever would have expected. And all the people that were trying to get at Jesus had one thought in mind. You know, we could take Lazarus out. Then there would be no proof that he was risen from the dead. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that's what people were thinking? That the enemies of Jesus had done everything they possibly could to discredit his ministry. And if it meant killing Lazarus, they would stop. Now, it's Jesus. The fear and the belief are there as well. The fear of the government and the religious leaders of his day after he had been crucified and was in the tomb. Who was it that believed that Jesus would do what he said he would do and be risen from the dead? It wasn't his followers. It was the government leaders that hated him so much. We better put a guard. Because if we don't put a guard there, the disciples are going to come and they're going to steal his body away and say, look, he raised from the dead just like he said he would. Intentionally, Scripture tells us that Jesus postponed his trip to see Lazarus. John chapter 11, we read it. He stayed where he was for an additional 2 days. That made no sense to anybody. And if not saving Lazarus made no sense, consider that Jesus had decided to go back into enemy territory where they had just threatened to kill him. And he was going to go back to see his family. Now, I don't know about you, but imagine how difficult that would have been for Jesus. One of Jesus' closest friends was sick and dying. And Jesus had healed people left and right. And Jesus sat and waited until. Imagine how difficult that was for Jesus. And then when he got the word that Lazarus had passed, he headed back to Lazarus' hometown. Made no sense. You know, there's something else that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We believe in a God that is all powerful, that created life out of nothing, and yet during the events of the week that's just passed before Jesus was resurrected from the dead, God watched his son beaten, accused, lied about, and murdered. And God did nothing. You know, just like Jesus understood there was more to the story with Lazarus, God knew there was more to the story of Jesus. So God waited. God waited until Jesus had been crucified, had been put into the tomb, and the rock had been covered up, or the opening had been covered up by the rock. And you wonder why nothing's being done. Oh, right. Something was being done. History was being made. And something that you and I have based our very lives on was beginning to take place. Something was being done. But we didn't see the whole thing. Does it sound like anything that's going on in your life lately? Things happen and we don't see the whole picture. And it's not until weeks or maybe months or years later that we finally say, I got it. I see why that happened. But while you're going through it, you don't get it. Mary Magdalene had followed Jesus. She was probably with Jesus when they went to Judea, and she saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. But she had been resurrected also. She had been raised from a life that was filled with sin. She had her life completely changed because of Jesus. And yet she saw change come from Lazarus' state, from death to life. Jesus on and on continued to tell the disciples and his followers that he had to go through this, but he would rise again from the dead. She had trouble believing. That sound like you? Definitely sounds like me at times. I struggle. I understand. It's like, no, God, come on. This is the way you're supposed to do it. God in a still, quiet voice, I know the story. I know the end. Just walk with me. As the psalmist said, through the valley of the shadow of death, walk with me. Isn't it interesting that even the empty tomb was not enough for the disciples? If you go and look at the reading of Luke, they sit there and they see what had happened, and they said, they remembered that he had said this, that he would be crucified and risen again on the third day. Peter, the one who would always blurt things out, and we would say, oh, I would never do that. Oh, yes, I would. I am. Peter ran to the tomb, and he looked, and he stooped in, and he peered in, and saw the empty linen wrappings. And what did he say that Peter did? Did he celebrate? He went home again, wondering what had happened. I don't get it. Peter went home thinking, it makes no sense. I don't understand. But for you and for me, hindsight is pretty good. We see it. Not only was Lazarus resurrected from the dead, not only did God resurrect Jesus from the dead, but you and I can be resurrected from our old life into a new life that reflects the love of God. Oh, no, Rich, you don't understand. I've messed up my life so bad. You don't know all the stupid things I've done. I'll even start making a list. And God just says, oh, no. Really? You think it's tough to forgive you when you do stupid things? God had the power to resurrect Jesus from the dead. And you're worried about some stupid indiscretion? All right, use the spiritual term. You're worried about a half a dozen sins? God says, no. If I can resurrect people, I can resurrect you without you even dying. I can resurrect you dying to yourself and following me. I don't know where you are in your life. Maybe you're sitting there going, I know, I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. But the question is posed to you and to me, do you believe this? And if you believe this, then your life has been resurrected from the old life to the new life. To life consumed by the world, to life resurrected and reflecting the love of God. Do you believe? If I was Hollywood, I'd say, he's back. And he is. Do you believe it? Christ is risen. He is risen in me. Gracious God, thank you.